Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa afdalu salati wa atammu taslim. Ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa habibina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Again, Assalamu alaikum, and this is your brother Dawud with you. I'm the executive director of the Michigan chapter of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which we are a chapter of America's largest civil liberties and advocacy organization for American Muslims. We're no stranger to your community, though we haven't been up there in quite a while, in particular as it relates to the wabah, the COVID-19 virus that has many of us working from home or doing programming from home and not in the masajid and Islamic centers as we normally would be. And we ask Almighty God, Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal, to lift this plague, this wabah from us and to keep our family safe. And we also ask Almighty Allah to heal those amongst us who are ill of all diseases and all maladies, both physical as well as spiritual. So before I have Sister Amy, our excellent staff attorney at CAIR-Michigan, open up with the actual meat of this evening's presentation on Know Your Rights with Law Enforcement. And then we will be available for any questions at the end. Just as a reminder to all of you who are watching this now or will watch this in its entirety, that we are winding up the year 2020, and we are also winding up the presidency of the 45th president of these United States of America. And irrespective of whether there is someone who affiliates with the party that has a symbol of the donkey or the party that has a symbol of the elephant, that there are still real civil rights and civil liberties concerns that Muslims have had, and particularly since the tragedy of 9/11, and that will continue into 2021. So we just need to keep our awareness up and stay vigilant that even though many in the community are happy with the outcome of the election results, by no means does this, in any sense of the imagination, mean that there's going to be less issues in terms of how American Muslims are dealt with by federal law enforcement, be it in airports, border crossings, or if it comes to home visits by particular agencies. We actually have no proof or no evidence that anything drastically will change. So we have to keep on lobbying for better policies on the local, state, and federal level, of course. And we have to also do our jobs of explaining our faith to fellow Americans. But we also have to stand up for our rights. And for those of us who think that there is safety in the margins of just being quiet while there is harassment from law enforcement, then I'm here to tell you, and especially from the African American experience, that will get you and that will get our community absolutely nowhere if we just stay silent while our community is being targeted by federal entities. And for us to exercise our rights is probably the most patriotic thing that we could do as American citizens. And as the great American 20th century historian and philosopher Howard Zinn famously said, that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. So patriotism is not sitting back and taking abuse. Being a real American patriot is actually showing dissent when we as Muslims aren't being treated the same way as people who are in the status quo in the American society. We're not looking for any special rights. We just want to be treated just like how people in the status quo of the dominant culture are treated. And with that, I will end with my comments now, and we'll have Sister Amy, who is our staff attorney, will proceed with the presentation of knowing your rights, us knowing our rights with law enforcement.
Thank you, Brother Dawud. That was actually very well said. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. One of the things I'd like to start with is something that Brother Dawud said, and when he talks about being patriotic and our rights. So in America, we have this understanding that we have this federal constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and it's a very powerful document, and that's where all of our rights come from. But something that's amazing about the Constitution is that it doesn't just protect American citizens. The Constitution actually protects all persons who find themselves in the United States. Whether you're a citizen, a lawful permanent resident, whether you're here on a worker visa, whether you're here on a visitor visa, or whether you're here and you're not documented at all, you have constitutional rights that protect you as long as you're in the United States. And that's an amazing thing. So I think that one of the things that we need to do is ensure that we're understanding our rights and protecting those rights, and that's why we're here speaking with you today. When we talk about law enforcement, some people have this understanding, especially in our community, that we're really talking about the FBI. We've had a lot of FBI involvement in our community since 9/11, and really even way before 9/11. We've been targeted for investigations for not really any reason at all. And that only heightened after 9/11. And it's only heightened since we've had this current administration that's in office. In fact, everything shut down during COVID except for FBI investigations. We've still had a particularly large number of people contacting our office who've been contacted by federal law enforcement agencies like the FBI. But it's important to know that law enforcement agencies can come in many various types. There's a lot of ways where law enforcement can interact with somebody's life. We could be talking about the FBI. For our community, we can be talking about immigration and customs enforcement, and we could be talking about state or local police departments. And no matter which department of the law enforcement is contacting you, your rights remain the same, and law enforcement obligations actually remain the same. So with that being said, I'd like to talk a little bit about what rights do we have when we have law enforcement interactions. So there are two scenarios that really play themselves out with how we find ourselves engaged with law enforcement. And the first one is when we find ourselves being targeted in our home for investigations, or what the FBI like to say, friendly conversations to find out how we feel about things, because that's a lot of the ways that we find ourselves being investigated by the FBI. Maybe they knock on the door and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you about your feelings about this policy that this administration has, or this foreign government and their policies. So the first way is in your home. And the Constitution of the United States really protects people most when they're in their homes. You have the most right to privacy and the most rights to protection in your home. There's no law enforcement agency that's allowed to enter your home, and just because they came there. There's only really two ways that they can enter your home. And the first one is if they have a warrant to search your home, and the second one is if we invite them in. CAIR-Michigan advises people that we never invite law enforcement into our house. We don't have an obligation to do so, and we should never do so. If the law enforcement agency comes knocking at your door and they say, hey, we'd like to come in and talk to you about such and such policy, we don't invite them in, because when they come in, then they want to talk and they want to stay and they want to look around and they want to observe what's going on. And as Muslims, sometimes we feel like, well, we're not really doing anything wrong, so we don't have anything to hide, so what's the harm? But there's actually a lot of harm. My mom gave me advice when I was little. She said, don't start something that you don't want to finish, because it's easier to say no at the beginning. And that's exactly what how you have to deal with law enforcement, right? So when they come to the house, if you let them in the first time, they're coming back a second time and then a third time. And then by the time you have had enough, it's too late. And now they're becoming very forceful about wanting to speak with you more and more. So we don't have to let them in our house, and we should actually never let them in our house. The way we should actually deal with it is, if you have a law enforcement agency come to your house and they're looking to speak with you, you politely tell them that you're not interested in speaking to them without an attorney. And then you get a business card and you shut the door, and then you contact an attorney like or CAIR-Michigan or a private attorney if you want, and you set up a time to speak with the law enforcement agency only if it becomes necessary. The other way we might see law enforcement is usually during a traffic stop. We maybe we're speeding, maybe we have a dim headlight, maybe there's really no reason, but they stop us anyways to pull us over on the side of the road. We have a little bit of less protections when we're outside of the house and in our car. You have some right to privacy, but you don't have an absolute right to privacy when you're driving in your car. And it's important to note that Michigan is a border state, right? So while we might think that law enforcement in Michigan pulling us over on the side of the road is going to be either our local police department or maybe the state police if we're on the expressway, but we know that there are instances in which Customs and Border Protection have actually driven around and pulled people over on the side of the road. They've given out traffic citations. They use it as an excuse to engage people that they've targeted because maybe they look like there's a possibility that they're not here lawfully or that they've had a recent border crossing. Michigan, the entire state of Michigan, so even in Lansing, is considered a border state. So Customs and Border Protection have really carte blanche in the state of Michigan to engage in stops when they think somebody might have recently crossed a border. And when that happens, the same thing goes. We shouldn't be giving them information. You're required to answer questions for them to identify yourself, but you're not really required to do more than that. And unless they have an agreement with the local police, they can't really search your car or they can't really give you a traffic citation. But if you are stopped by local police departments or the state police and you're on the road with your car, you still have the right to remain silent. So some of the rights that outlast everything, regardless of where you are, whether you're in public, at home, or in the workplace, is your right to remain silent. And it's really the most powerful right that you have when you're engaging with law enforcement. It's given to you by the US Constitution, no matter who you are. You have the right to not say anything at all. And we should really be exercising that right. So when we're stopped by the police and they're giving us a ticket, we don't want to engage them in useless conversations. We want to be very direct when we're answering their questions. We want to be respectful as much as possible because we know that the police are not always respectful and they're not always the most calm people. They're the ones that are tasked with being calm on the scene, and generally they're not calm. A lot of times they're in a state of heightened tension, and that can lead to a very dangerous situation for certain folks, especially minorities and people of color. We know this summer was especially a dangerous summer for our African American brothers and sisters. So we have to be conscious of that, which is why we don't want to be engaging law enforcement unnecessarily. We don't want to be engaging them in a manner that makes us less safe. So the best way to do it is to, take your ticket and fight that ticket in court. We're not going to have a conversation about whether or not you're doing anything wrong at that time. The place to fight that is in court, and we're not going to be engaging them in extra conversation. Another thing to realize when you're in your car and you're stopped by law enforcement is that you don't have to consent to a search of your car. Sometimes they'll ask you, hey, do you mind if I look in the trunk? Or do you mind if I search? Or do you mind if you get out and I just look at your car really quickly? You never have to engage in a search of your car. You do have the right to privacy in your car. If they can't tell you what they think you've done wrong to search your car, there is no reason for them to search your car. And sometimes people will say, well, won't that make them hold us there longer? Or won't they just bring a dog out? Or whatever scenario they can do to give you a hard time. And yeah, that might be the case. They might hold you on scene for a little bit longer. They might want to bring a dog out to sniff your car. But overall, the intrusiveness of staying there is a lot less than the intrusiveness of having to get out of the car and then have the police tear your car apart for no reason other than the fact that they didn't like the way that you were looking when they drove by you. So they decided to pull you over and give you a hard time and violate your rights that day. So never consent to a search of your car. It's the same thing with your home. Never consent to a search of your home. Never invite people into your home. If you are at home, I'd like to switch back to being at home, because when you're at home, you have the right to not have people enter your home unless they have a warrant. But there's really some things that you need to be aware of. So police, when they show up, they can use tricks. They don't have to always tell you the truth. They don't even always do tell you the truth. It's a well-known fact, and it's a well understood law enforcement technique that they lie to people and they trick them. So sometimes they might come to your house and they want to have a conversation with you. So they say something to try to trick you. Well, so and so said this, or so and so said that. And so that's why we don't engage in a conversation. But the other thing that they do is they might show up at your house and tell you they have a warrant, but what they have is actually not a warrant. They've been known to do that in the past. So if they do have a warrant before they enter your home, you're allowed to ask them to see it. And there's some things you should do when they tell you they have a warrant to enter your house when you're looking at it. The first thing you want to do is look at it and make sure it has the correct date on it. Make sure it's dated. If it's not dated, it's not valid. Make sure that it has the right address on it. Police have been known to go to the wrong people's house sometimes. And there was an incident in Detroit, I think 2 years ago, where they were executing a warrant on somebody's house and somebody got shot and they were actually at the wrong house. So we want to check the address on it to make sure that they're at the right home. The warrant should also be signed by a judge. If it's not signed by a judge, it's not valid. It means that they just filled out a piece of paper and brought it to your house hoping to trick you into letting them in. If it's not signed by a judge, it's not a valid warrant. So you can refuse to let them in your house at that point. The other thing is the warrant itself will be limited. It's not going to say just your address. It's going to tell you what they're looking for in the areas that they're allowed to search. It shouldn't say that they're allowed to search just anywhere. It should be limited in scope based on what they're looking for. So if they do have a valid warrant, you do have to let them in your house and you do have to stand out of the way. If that happens, some things that you can do to protect yourself is really get a business card from the officer that's on scene, that's in charge. There will definitely be somebody on scene that looks like he's in charge of the situation and people are going to him and seeking assistance from him, and he will look like he's telling people what to do. You should get his business card. The second thing you should do is you should film what's going on. There's many times where law enforcement has gone to court and they've lied. They've said this didn't happen or this happened or they found this way. And it's actually not true. I actually sat in court and watched a police officer lie on the stand in Wayne County. And the judge picked up on the fact that he was lying because what he said is absurd. But when you go to court, one of the things that happens is police are given a lot of deference. The law enforcement and the justice system is set up in a way where police are given the benefit of the doubt in a way that the accused is not. Our Constitution tells us that everybody is innocent until proven guilty, but it doesn't always play itself out like that in court. And if it comes down to the word of between the person who's being accused and a police officer, 99% of the time the police officer is going to be observed. So that's why we should be filming our law enforcement encounters. And as long as you're not getting in the way, you have the absolute right in Michigan to film all law enforcement encounters in your home, on the street, in your car, everywhere. You can film their image and their voice. So we should be doing that. And you should call an attorney. If you have the ability to call an attorney to come to the scene, to check out the warrant, to make sure it's valid, to see what's going on and to observe, you should absolutely do that. If you call our office and we can't come down, 9 times out of 10, we'll be able to find somebody that will be able to assist you in coming to your home for a search warrant from your area. So we should be doing that. So if they come into the house, you're gonna stay out of their way. You're gonna film as much as you can, and you're gonna get the number of the person who's in charge. And if you can get an attorney on scene, you're gonna want to do that. If you can't get an attorney on scene, you're definitely gonna want to seek the advice of counsel. And they have to give you a list of everything that they've taken out of your home. If they've taken something out of your home, they have to give you a very detailed sheet. It has to tell you what it was, how much it was, where it was at when they took it. And you need that receipt in case something happens. You can get your property back at the end of whatever investigation is going on. So that becomes very important. It becomes important for another way, because if you have a copy of it and then they add something to it later, or they take something off of it later, then you're going to know that that's not accurate, and you're going to be able to challenge that list in court. We've actually seen that happen. When one of our brothers was shot a couple years ago, we saw a property list from his home when it was raided, And there was something that was clearly added to the end of that list after the initial encounter in his home. It was added later. It was in different handwriting. It wasn't initialed. It was under the line. It said final and end. So it was clearly added later, and it was done because a law enforcement officer that entered the home had made a big mistake and had taken somebody's life, and then they were trying to justify it by painting the person as a criminal. So it's important that we hold our police accountable by getting the information that we can while they're still on scene. The other thing is, sometimes police will come to the house with an arrest warrant. An arrest warrant doesn't really give the police any ability to enter your home. If they come to the house with an arrest warrant, it's just like a search warrant. The first thing you want to do is look at it. You want to make sure that it's valid. You want to make sure that it says a warrant on the top. You want to make sure that it's dated and signed by a judge. And you want to make sure it has the name of an individual that either resides in the home or is in that home at that time. If the person is not in the home at that time, you can tell the police officers he's not here and they should not enter the home. If the person is in the home, the best thing for the person to do to keep everybody else in the home safe is to go out onto the porch and be taken into custody peacefully and exercise his rights to remain silent. But a search warrant does not allow law enforcement necessarily to enter your home. Another thing that we're seeing a lot is Immigration and Customs Enforcement's apprehension warrants. They're not really warrants for an arrest. They are like a detention letter. They're usually an administrative thing. If somebody like law enforcement or an ICE officer shows up at your house with an administrative warrant to take somebody into custody for an immigration violation, prior to that person going into custody, the first thing you should do is call an attorney, because it may not necessary for them to be going in with an administrative order that's not signed by a judge, and that's something that an immigration attorney should be looking at prior to the person being detained. The other thing is when people are arrested, we have this idea from mostly, I think, from like watching shows like Law and Order or other crime shows, that the police have to read you your rights. You couldn't tell you how many people call our office and say they violated my rights because they didn't read me my Miranda rights. And we've all heard it, right? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. There was actually a Supreme Court order that came down, I think about 4 years ago now, that says law enforcement doesn't have to read you your rights. It's not a requirement that they do so. The only time that they have to read you your rights is if they're going to ask you questions, which means if you get in the back of a vehicle with a law enforcement officer and you start talking and asking questions, anything you say can be used against you because they didn't ask you anything. So we should not be doing that. So if we are arrested or detained by a law enforcement officer, we should not strike them up in conversation. We should not be assuming that they have to read us our rights, or anything that we say is going to be thrown out of court. That's just not the way that it is. It's just not. Some other things to keep in mind is our electronic devices. Sometimes if we're on the street or we get detained, we have almost everybody carries a cell phone, and our cell phone carries so much personal information, our contacts, our pictures, everything. But there are ways to protect your information when we're encountering law enforcement and they take custody of our cell phone. The first thing is have a unique code on your cell phone. Have a PIN code, have a password with letters or numbers or both, have a unique swipe code. They have the pattern swipes that you can use, all of those. You should have at least one of those on it. If you have a code on your phone, law enforcement cannot just open your phone. They can't make you open your phone just to look in it and see if there's a possibility you have something incriminating on it. They have to obtain a warrant. They have to have probable cause. The same to search your house or your car. So we should be putting a PIN code. One thing that doesn't necessarily make you safe is if you have facial recognition or a thumbprint on your phone. There are ways in which law enforcement have been able to force people to open their phones with their face recognition and their thumbprint. I always advise people, if you have an iPhone, that's a very cool feature, I guess, but it doesn't make it a good idea for you to use that, or even your retina. The only thing the courts have recognized as protecting your rights is when you take your time to create something that's unique to you and put that on your phone. So that's a really important thing for people to remember. When we're driving, it's really nice to be able to just touch our phone and open it and talk to text or whatever. It's hands-free, but it doesn't make your information safe from law enforcement. So I think those are the big ideas around what our rights are. So when we encounter law enforcement, it's important to remember you have the right to remain silent, and we should be using that. You have the right to decline any search of your person, of your property, of your car, and your home. You never have to consent to that, and we should not be consenting to that needlessly. When we diminish our own rights by speaking without any reason to speak, or answering questions for no reason, or consenting to search, we're diminishing our rights, but we're also putting ourselves at risk and putting other people in our community at risk of having their rights violated. So it's very important to assert your rights. Never let any law enforcement into your home without a search warrant that's signed by a judge and is for your home. If it says subpoena on top, it's not a warrant, it's a subpoena, and that can be fought in court before you let them in. That's another thing that law enforcement like to do, is come to your home with something that says subpoena instead of warrant. It has to say warrant, has to be dated, has to be signed. Administrative apprehension order from ICE is not permission to come into your home, and we shouldn't be consenting to people coming into our home to arrest people in our home. People should be leaving the home to be taken into custody. So those are the very important things that I think that I'd like to address with you today, and to know that we are seeing law enforcement encounters in our community. We get calls every week from law enforcement encounters, FBI encounters, all of it. And some of it just has to do with our identity as Muslims, or our identity as being from a particular country, or even a specific region of certain countries. We are targeted more for law enforcement. So I think with that, I'm going to see, I don't know if there's any questions, or if Brother Dawud maybe has something to add to that.
No, what I would say is, if you could also just briefly elaborate on if people are coming back into the country regarding border reentry, if they're asked questions about their political beliefs or their religious beliefs. If you can touch on that.
Sure. So Michigan is a border state. And in addition to being a border state and having people come in from Canada across the border, the Detroit Metro Airport is one of the largest international airports in the region. So we see a lot of people coming in through DTW. I always advise people, if you're going overseas, not to come in through DTW, because it's not friendly specifically to Muslims. It's a really horrible place to go through customs. With that being said, we do see a lot of people having problems coming into the United States after an overseas trip, especially if you're going to a country that is predominantly a Muslim country. All of the countries in the Middle East, in South Asia, we see people being detained for long periods of time and asked questions. There are definitely questions that they're allowed to ask you when you're at the border, and those questions include making you identify yourself, anything that can be found on the front page of your passport, what countries you visited while you were overseas, and what countries or what items you might be bringing back with you, because not everything can be brought back into the country. No fruits, no vegetables, no flowers, things of that nature. So those are all valid questions. The purpose of customs is to make sure that you're not committing a crime at the border, literally at the border. So all of their questioning should be limited to that. However, we know as Muslims that we are significantly more likely to be detained at the border for secondary screening or more intensive questioning. We have our bag search, we have our carry-on search, we have significant travel issues. So when you go into secondary screening, sometimes they like to ask you questions about who do you know, right? Who do you know in whatever? Maybe you just came back from like Ivory Coast. Well, what contacts do you have in Ivory Coast? Who do you stay with? What do you think of their president? They just had an election. What do you think about the outcomes of the election? Things of that. Those are all impermissible questions. They have no basis as to why you're at the border. They have no basis to determining whether you're eligible to re-enter at the border. And really, they're just basically a fishing expedition. We know Muslims get asked a lot about our political beliefs. So, well, what do you feel about what's going on in Palestine, for instance? If there was just a big event in Palestine, is a big question that we get. What do you think about the Muslim ban executive orders that the Trump administration has put in place? That's none of their business, and it has no basis for why you're at the border. So they're impermissible. If they ask you questions other than where did you go, like what countries did you visit, what are you bringing back, who are you, you don't have to answer them. You absolutely do not have to answer them. You can say, I respectfully decline to answer these questions. They're not appropriate questions. If they try to strike you up in a conversation about your religion, which is something that they really like to do, they'll bring somebody to you. Maybe they're a Muslim. Maybe they are not a Muslim, but they speak your language. And they'll start talking to you about, oh, I know a lot about your religion because I lived in such and such an area for a period of time. I'm really interested in it. And they try to strike up a conversation with you. That is not a conversation. That is them trying to figure out how religious you are, because in their minds, the more religious you are, the bigger threat you are to the United States. So those are questions that we should not be answering. Like as Muslims, we like to give dawah to people, right? We like to talk about our religion and let people experience our religion through us. But when you're in situations like at the border, it's really not a good idea, because they're not really interested in learning about our religion. And it is a very big tactic of CBP to bring somebody who's from your home country or somebody who speaks your language to talk to you. They think it disarms you. They think it makes you more comfortable. So just be wary of that. And with regards to border entries, the same thing with your electronics go. Have a passcode on your electronics, all of them, your cell phone, your tablet, your computers, all of it. Have a unique passcode, and you never have to open your phone at the border for anybody if you're a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident. If they don't have a warrant, you never have to give them your passcode, and you never have to open your phone. They sometimes will seize your phone, and if they seize your phone, you contact CAIR-Michigan. We've been very successful at getting people's phones back in very short period of time. So that is something that people are worried about, is having their electronics seized at the border, because we have all of our information from our whole life basically on our phone, and if we lose it, sometimes we're a little bit out of step with what we need, because nobody memorizes phone numbers. So we have been successful at getting people's phones back. So if you get your phone seized, you contact CAIR-Michigan, and you should also consider traveling with a phone that doesn't have all of your personal data on it. Have a phone that you just use for overseas, so that if you lose it, you're not losing everything. I'm glad you brought that up, Brother Dawud. I really wanted to talk about that. I had forgotten about that.
Thank you for your further elaboration, Sister Amy. So with that, we will go to the questions. If there are any questions, I see someone made a comment on YouTube saying that they're going to remove the fingerprint off their phone right now. They were unaware about the information. And, sometimes we look at technology as an ease, sometimes as a benefit, but that technology can be used in a way that is not advantageous to us. So thank you very much for that, for explaining that. So we'll just take a moment to see if there are any other.
I see, Brother Dart, I see one more question. It says, if we're stopped by police, will there be a retaliation if we exercise our Miranda rights or refuse to answer questions? So that's that's a good question. People are always worried about that. The police understand that you have rights. They don't have a lot of legal training, but they have basic legal training, and they know that you have your right to remain silent. Police officers who are going to do the wrong things are always going to do the wrong things, and police officers who are going to do the right things are always going to do the right things. So we should be exercising our Miranda rights and all of our rights, regardless of fear of retaliation. Like I said, the most that they're likely to do is try to keep you there longer, try to detain you, give you a hard time to leave, so that they can wear you down and get you to answer questions or consent to a search. But if you stay strong in your understanding, there's not really any penalty for exercising your Miranda rights. It's absolutely afforded to everybody, and there's really nothing they can do about it. So I see another question from YouTube that says, can a person who was stopped by the police record the interaction, or do they need to ask permission? That's a very good question, because police will tell you that you're not allowed to record them or that you're interfering with them, but you absolutely have the right to record your interactions with the police. Every single time. If you are stopped by the police in your car, you can record it. You can Facebook Live it. You can stream it. If you're stopped on the street for whatever reason, because you're walking down the street, you absolutely have the right to record that. If you see somebody else who's pulled over and you don't like the way the police are handling it, you can record that conversation. As long as you're not as close, or as long as you're not interfering with their actual police work, you have absolutely the right. The police do not have any expectation of privacy while they're engaging in their duties in public. And the only way that we have been able so far to hold police accountable is because we have people who are willing to record their interactions or live stream them on Facebook. We see a lot of police brutality taking place, and the extrajudicial killing of African American men on the street. And it's not a new phenomenon. People keep asking, how could this happen? Why is this happening now? It's not happening now. It's always been happening. But the only way that we're seeing it now is because people are recording those interactions. That's one benefit that we have from our electronic devices. And my suggestion is that you should be recording every interaction you have with law enforcement, with the exception of the border. You are absolutely not allowed to record anything taking place at the border. So if you're coming through CBP, you cannot record CBP interactions, but every other law enforcement encounter you can. Do you have anything to add to that, Brother Dawud?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, and then we have another question that just came through that says that they have a lot of international students in their community. Are there any laws that are different for non-citizens inside the US, and how are those laws different for non-citizens at the borders or airports? So that's a really good question. That's a very, very technical question. If you're inside the United States, you have and it doesn't matter if you're an international student, if you are here on DACA status, if you are undocumented, you have the same constitutional rights. The Constitution protects all persons. The word is persons, it's not citizens, it's not residents, it is persons, all persons in the United States. That there's two exceptions to that, and one of them is at the border. U.S. citizens, U.S. citizens at the border have more rights than everybody else. We don't even U.S. citizens don't have full constitutional rights at the border, but they have more rights than everybody else, followed by lawful permanent residents, and then followed by visa holders. If you're a visa holder and you come to the border and they're asking you questions, then you might want to be a little bit more cautious about what you're willing and not willing to answer, because a visa doesn't guarantee you entry into the United States. It allows you to come and ask for entry into the United States, even if you are on an H-1B visa and you've had it for 3 years and you just returned to your home country and then came back. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get back into the country. So people on a visa need to be more careful at the border about how much they push back, because nobody has full protections at the border. The other instance is if you're stopped inside of the United States by an immigration and customs enforcement or a customs and border protection officer, and you are here and you're not a U.S. citizen, you may have to present your card to show that you are lawfully here. So if you are here on a visa of any sort, student visa, H-1B visa, lawful permanent resident card, anything, you have to carry that document around with you, so that if you are asked by a law enforcement agency who is tasked with immigration, that you can present it to them. So those are the only two distinctions that are made between citizens and non-citizens in the United States. So there's another question that says somebody in Texas was maced, I'm assuming by the police, for recording his son's arrest from across the street. Is it safe for a bystander to record video? What are our rights? So as I've said, it is absolutely your right to record all interactions with law enforcement, whether you're involved in them or somebody else is involved with them. Does that mean that the law enforcement is always going to act in the appropriate manner? No. We know this. We've seen this. This has been for two or more years. It's been the impetus for the Black Lives Matter movement, because we know that police do not act always in the way that they're supposed to. Not all police officers are inherently bad, but they have the most power in every situation when you're encountering them, and they are prone to abusing that power. So safety is a relative thing, and that's a personal judgment that everybody has to make, right? So your comfort level and my comfort level, maybe they're not going to be the same. So you have to make a decision for yourself, whether you're going to take the risk of being maced by the police for helping to protect somebody else's rights, or maybe that's not something that you're comfortable with. But if something happens and the law enforcement has abused their power, especially if you're recording it, there are ways, many ways, where we can hold police officers accountable. And there's a big push for criminal justice reform now, because to be able to even more intently hold police officers accountable for their abuses of power and their abuse of discretion in those situations. So there's a question. It says, what is the policy on tinting your vehicle windows? Can the police stop one for that? Like a lot of youth like to tint their windows. So that is a statutory question. There are laws from the state of Michigan and different cities about the level of tint you can have on your front window, specifically, especially your front window and your front driver's and passenger side windows. You're not allowed to have them. I don't know what they call it. They used to call it blackout tint. You're not allowed to do that. That in Michigan, that's not permissible. So yes, if you have an illegal tint on your window, because it is prohibited to have a certain darkness on your window, they can stop you. They can ticket you for it. So I know a lot of people who like to tint their windows for various reasons. I like to have tinted windows. My eyes are very light. The sun really bothers my eyes, so I have a darker tint on my windows, but you have to be conscientious about following the law, and that those laws are for safety reasons too. Yeah, for Michigan definitely has a rule about how much you can tint your windows. So I think those are all the questions that I see. I think we can, if you want, Brother Dawud, we can give it another minute and to see if there's any more questions that pop up.
Yeah, we'll just give it one more minute. But for those who are watching right now, to keep up with CAIR-Michigan events, please go onto our website at cairmichigan.org. And inshallah, we will be having some more of these virtual or online workshops and know your rights presentations. During COVID-19, sheltering in place, such as knowing your rights at the workplace, is a very important subject. Students knowing their rights in schools is a very important subject as well. We do have another question.
So that question says, can I give to a charity organization without becoming a terror suspect? That is a very, very tricky question for several reasons. There are a lot of charities that you can give to and you won't have any issues. We, as Muslim community in general, like to give to charities that are overseas, because we always feel like there's a lot of benefits here in the United States. There's a lot more wealth. Even people who are impoverished in America sometimes have a lot more than people who are impoverished overseas, and that we see a lot of need overseas. Giving charity to people who are directly overseas and organizations that are overseas sometimes can pose a risk for people, and that's because the list of terror organizations that support terror overseas is growing and growing and changing. It grows and changes every day. We've advised people before on this issue. My advice to people on this issue when we're giving to organizations overseas: know the organization, know who you're giving the money to, know what kind of work that they're doing. The other thing is there's a lot of organizations in the United States that you can give to that are doing work overseas. You're a lot safer giving money to people in the United States who are then doing the direct work overseas than you are to sending money overseas. And if you're sending money overseas to do charity work or for any reason, make sure you're giving it to people that you know. like your family members, your mom, your dad, your brother, your uncle, somebody that you're directly related to, so that you can, if there becomes a question about that issue, you can say, well, this is my uncle, we're related. And it's not just some stranger who contacted you off Facebook who maybe is running an orphanage overseas that needs a little bit of money. It's important to know where you're sending your money to. That's the best way to protect yourself. And my advice is try to give money to organizations that are based in the United States but doing the work on the ground overseas. There's a lot of them. You can find them if you look. They're not even that hard to find.
Yeah, if I can reiterate a point or add on something additionally, and what Sister Amy says 100% correct, that if you want to give charity to an organization that is doing work overseas, give it to an American-based organization that is a licensed 501c3 nonprofit organization, right? That's giving the aid to that direct area, be it a Muslim-led charity, or even if it's a non-Muslim-led charity that's doing some relief work in a particular area. Well, I would say, just for as a clarifying point, there has never been an American citizen post 9/11 that has given charity to a legally operating Islamic charity, even if that charity came under probe by federal government. Now, I have to say that to be very clear, because we know that there's been a couple of Muslim-led charities that were closed down post 9/11. One of them, some of the members who were part of the board and staff actually are in prison right now. That's the Holy Land Foundation trial. But not a single donor in that case, and they had hundreds of donors. Not a single donor was ever prosecuted, because they were giving in good faith to a legally operating organization with a valid 501c3 nonprofit status. So I just want to make that clear. I mean, it's still CAIR's organizational position that that was a politicized trial, without getting to the specifics of that particular Holy Land issue. There's a documentary on it online if you want to look up more. But point being, make sure that you're giving to an organization that is licensed here in the States, and you won't have any problems, and you should have no fear about doing that and giving to any registered 501c3 nonprofit organization that's doing charity work. And the third point is, I would just like to mention is, when we talk about charitable work and giving to charitable organizations, there are Muslim charities who are doing a lot of work here in the state of Michigan and in America, right? So just also keep that in mind when we're talking about charitable giving, that charitable giving and zakah just doesn't relate to giving to causes overseas. And I just really have to reiterate that point. And I say it often on the minbar when I'm giving khutbah, and I've said it before there in East Lansing. I've said it before there, giving khutbah there. Let's see if we have any more questions. There's one by Brother Abu Bakr.
So Brother Abu Bakr is asking if we have these FAQs on this topic on our website that we can refer to. We do have information on our website. You can also contact us at info@cairmichigan.org.com. I'm sorry, info@cairmichigan.org to find out very specific information. If you have a topic that you'd like printed materials on, we can send that out to you as well. So you can contact us directly on our website or at our email address for that information.
Yes. Okay, there's another question at the top.
So this question is a question that's very important for a lot of people who are seeking immigration relief. And it says, if I was arrested and all the charges were dropped in a court, how does this affect my future prospects to become a U.S. citizen? So an arrest itself, because we have this idea that we are innocent until proven guilty, the arrest itself should not be used against you when you try to adjust status from whatever status you have now into a U.S. citizen. And that's if all the charges were dropped. If there was some sort of plea deal, which happens sometimes, where maybe you pled guilty to something and then you did probation, and at the end of the probation, they make the charges go away as if they never happened, that will show up on an immigration background check, and that could affect your immigration status. If you ever find yourself in a position where you are arrested by any law enforcement, local, state, or federal law enforcement agency, and you're charged with a crime, you want to get a criminal attorney who knows immigration law. That's very, very important. There are many people who took a plea deal for something thinking that because their lawyer told them it's a misdemeanor, won't have any effect against you in your immigration status, and then come to find out 5 years later when they're adjusting status, they can't adjust because they had that criminal record. So if anybody's ever arrested and charged with a crime, you want to get an attorney who is a criminal attorney who knows immigration law, or you want to consult an immigration attorney prior to taking any sort of plea deal or anything like that. There's another question says, if you forgot to carry an insurance card or driver's license with you while driving, but you have a PDF or photocopy of it in your phone, is that acceptable to show to the law enforcement? And if yes, how can it be shown safely without much access to other information on your phone? So, not having your driver's license on your person when you're driving is a crime in and of itself. Having a photocopy of it is not acceptable. Having a copy of it on your phone is not going to be considered a valid ID. It happens from time to time. I got pulled over a couple years ago. I had given my ID to somebody to make a photocopy of it when I was registering my kids from school. I got busy, left the building without it, got pulled over, and didn't have it on me. Yeah, the officer was very nice. I gave him my ID number and he let me go with a warning. But you can be arrested for not having your ID on you when you are driving, or even if you're out in public and you don't have an ID, they can take you into custody. So it's very important to make sure that you always have your ID on you as much as possible. And a photocopy is not acceptable. So if you have the issue with insurance in Michigan is it's a very difficult state because we have a lot of rules and laws specifically that deal with your car insurance. Not having car insurance in Michigan and having your car on the road could subject your car to being towed. With that being said, and impounded, and you could actually find yourself losing your car. If you don't actually have insurance, they don't give your car back. They don't. And it can be a real problem. People have lost their license for stuff like that. So it's important to have your car insurance on you. With that being said, every insurance company in the state of Michigan is required by law to send their information to the Secretary of State. 9 times out of 10, police officers know whether you have insurance when they pull you over because it comes up on their screen. It's attached to your license plate number. So if they're giving you a hard time about your insurance, chances are they just want to give you a hard time because they know whether or not you have insurance, unless it's some situation where maybe you had just switched insurance. If it ever comes to the situation where you maybe switched insurance yesterday, you don't have the document in your hand at the time, because you're waiting for it to come in the mail. Police officers are human beings. They understand that. You can tell them, hey, I don't have it. I just switched my insurance. I have a copy of it on my phone. They emailed it to me. I don't have a printer. I wanted to print it out. And then ask them if you can show them from your phone. But when you do that, you have to be very deliberate. You can say, okay, I'm reaching to get my phone. I'm going to grab my phone with my right hand. You let them know everything that you're doing, because we know police officers are jumpy sometimes. And we've seen instances where people have reached for their driver's license and been shot. It happened to Philandro Castile just, I think, 3 years ago or 4 years ago in his car. And he was reaching for the driver's license. So if you're going to be reaching for something in your car, whether it's your phone or even your documents out of your glove box, you're going to want to wait till the officer's there and tell him, hey, I have to reach in here to get it. I'm going to be reaching with my right hand, and let him, and sort of broadcast what you're doing. But most of them will look at that from your phone. But it's best, if you can, to have paper copies of everything. Because if you get a police officer who wants to give you a hard time, they can just give you a hard time. There's not really much you can do about it. I think
that is it for the questions. We were trying to keep this within an hour, so we've been on for 55 minutes. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, you can contact us at CAIR-Michigan by going on our website and send us an email or call our office, which you could call after 10 a.m. during the weekdays. And we hope to be with you in the near future, inshallah. And as what was put on the screen earlier, and I will end with this, that CAIR-Michigan is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We get goose egg. We get $0 from any um,
I think what Brother Dowd was saying is that we don't get any funding from federal government or any type of grants at all. All of the money, all of the work that we do, that we through CAIR-Michigan, whether it's representing people who have been contacted by the FBI or our safe spaces director going in and giving programming to employers because maybe they've had an incident where they've discriminated and failed to provide proper accommodations to Muslim employees, to even to the litigation work that we're doing in federal court. It all comes from generous donations of individuals. So we appreciate your continued support at CAIR-Michigan.
Okay, with that, thank you all very much. May Allah bless you and protect you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.